there's no connection. The Chinese will speak their language. They're very
Yeah, I mean,
proud of
a lot
it.
of my
Tamils.
Yeah,
The Tamils
too. Yeah,
a lot of my friends go being embarrassed of speaking.
I know. I get
I
it.
mean, my family lived with me, so I learned it. But
Yeah.
most of my friends, they don't understand it.
No, I have cousins who call themselves DJ, VJ because they're Vijay. So
Like
VJ
Cash Patel, Kashyap Patel is now Cash.
What is that? I don't want to talk about that. Do you see that book we wrote about Princess
The comic?
Ivanka? What is that?
The
And
king.
Listo. Yeah, the king.
And
about the-
your Indian media persons, let me put this, said, he said Jai Shri Krishna.
During the hearing, yes.
What is that Jai Shri Krishna? He touched his father's feet. So he's a true Indian. I said, what rubbish touching feet? South of India doesn't touch feet.
Yeah.
We don't touch feet.
Yeah. In our in Kashmiri, we don't touch feet.
Yeah, do that, but also send your illegal immigrant with handcuffs. That's fine. That's all right. It can coexist.
In India, the Congress is making a lot of noise.
Yeah, yeah.
I think Brahmacharani wrote the syndicate.
See, my thing is you've done something illegal in somebody else's country. When
Agree.
Bangladeshis do it in India, you're making noise. When Indians do it in some other countries, that's not noise.
It's just the handcuffing and the shackles and the way
I think India has to let go of something because the tariffs, what we are going to, it's like Indian tariffs don't is the worst thing ever.
Exactly.
So you have to let go of something. So this they're letting go.
Yeah.
So the bigger picture you don't let go.
Also, what I'm hearing is India is investing in US. Like, what about the other way around?
Don't you know what India investing in US is crazy? In energy space, absolutely crazy. You want? I'll send you the details.
I would love to.
Send me mail. I'll give you a cake covered card. Yeah. Now the cake has
I will
gone
message
off.
you. Yes. I would love to.
We do a lot of work with the embassy, right?
So,
At the back, we don't make noise about it. No, sorry, it doesn't help to make noise. Wrong people should not make noise when such a delicate situation. When the entire embassy is quiet on everything, including the president. I mean, the ambassador.
so you were saying India is investing or the US?
No, India's
US is
investing
investing into India for ages.
for ages.
Wait a minute, this
The Indian
script
side is
about
a.
India investing.
No, it's about removing tariffs. India's tariffs are ridiculous. I never said it officially, but it's ridiculous.
I think the type of products we get back home are also not like,
No.
we don't have any variety.
There is no sense in our tariff. For example, the chiplets which are used for telecom industry, you will know this, which is used even for R&D. India puts 40 to 80% on chiplets out of US into India. Why? Nobody knows why. Some babu has sat somewhere and decided, it doesn't make sense. And then you have, what is it? Kentucky bourbon, which they're going to do.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of Republicans who are invested, right? So Kentucky bourbon, India has put a 175% tariff on it. So now the discussion is between 75 and 175 might be at 100%. You want to protect Indians' whiskey industry. But whiskey drinkers will drink their whiskey irrespective of
Oh,
that.
irrespective.
Yeah.
I keep looking for old monk here. I have access to Tennessee whiskey, I have access to everything in the world, but I still want to have my old monk. If you are used to it, I think.
Yeah, so I'm saying these are the things that India has to, they've already started with Harley Davidson, but these are the things India has to let go. A lot of things.
I think it will give our consumers also a lot of variety. In China, we saw like the amount of variety they have.
And it's cheap.
It's cheap and they have a
Because they have.
variety.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about it. There's no idea.
There's no यहाँ तो खुला है सब लोग.
Yeah.
Also here also, I mean, I was telling my mom I use all the Korean products and that I can't find them here.
No, but Korean products. In India you get, in Bangalore you get Korean products.
She was looking for that kojic acid soap which she couldn't find.
You get it in Korean soaps in Bangalore. Bangalore has Korean shops, Korean
I'll
brands.
ask my brother.
Innisfree is right into India.
Innisfree is in India?
Yeah.
Oh.
Must be for at least 5 years.
Not been aware.
And that's the best brand out of Korea and cosmetics.
मैंने मम्मी को बोला कोरियन प्रोडक्ट से सुनो क्या ब्लैक में भी रुके हुए हाँ ब्लैक में चला गया खत्म हो गया
See, they destroyed another beautiful Indian brand.
ब्लैक में
No, I mean, it had so much of equity, right? It's not Tata Sai, no, it's HL, it's a very safely said.
टाटा का क्या कोलगेट नहीं
They're not in toothpaste. What is it called? Salt to
Software.
Aircraft, right?
Maybe that's the new phrase. Yeah.
Because aircraft goes beyond
Software
software.
aircraft.
Software. Yeah, because aircraft technology goes beyond software. Right?
I still do Desh Ka Namak actually. Tata Life.
Yeah.
Tata Salt
I
Life.
don't get it. I get this modern sound.
Oh, modern salt is, I think they have two versions, so I didn't realize for the first 2 years I was having normal salt which is not iodized.
Yeah.
Then I realized कि मैं दिमाग से पैदल होती जा रही हूँ.
I think I must be
It's a
iodine.
nice expression. Dimag se paidal. Very nice. I haven't heard
Very
it.
Delhi actually.
Very Delhi, North
You know,
India.
there's a Kashmiri journalist, I don't know if she's come today. Aarti Singh Tikku. Aarti Tikku Singh, she's around.
Oh, I don't know.
You know her?
I don't know her.
Oh, she used to be with the Times of India and now she runs her own publication out of Delhi.
I should meet her.
Although you said Kashmiri,
Yeah,
right?
we're Kashmiri. I'm Kashmiri.
I know, that's what you said. So she wrote on this, my social media. She spoke about
All in due time.
killing of the Pandits, right?
Yeah.
So she's the one who broke that story.
Discuss it in person.
This show?
You're also Kashmiri?
No, I'm not. I'm a Punjabi.
Hi, I'm Khushbu. Hi,
Sarah, Bengali.
What did Indian
Actually, sorry, Washingtonian,
Washingtonian?
born and raised.
No, we were talking about a Kashmiri journalist. That's how we came up. So
Yeah.
not regional.
Anyway, born and brought up in Delhi.
But just check up. Aarti, she's staying somewhere around.
I think
I've
I've
heard her
that
name.
name.
Yeah,
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 I've heard that name. I'll definitely reach out to you. I'm always looking for my fellow pundits.
Are you?
Because of the food.
Oh, I fed her. Given her food. She's come home also. I can't remember her.
She lives in DC?
No, she's visiting DC. She said she would stay through Holi's gone.
Oh, I see.
She's a lovely person.
So how big is the Fiki? No, I know, but how big is it?
Vicky has 450 people in India. No, yeah, 445 people.
No, in India, but here, how big is this?
You're meeting Vicky.
That's great.
The whole office is going.
Fiki used to be our go-to place, of course, for budget days when we were like,
It is still.
it's just
बच्चे वाले दिन फिक्की चले
yeah,
जाओ.
FII and Fiki.
उस सिटी के पास ना
It's still there. Kansen Mandir building.
Yeah, yeah, that
heritage building built up in 1958.
डीडी न्यूज़ के पुराने ऑफिस के साथ पास था वहाँ पे because I interned with DD News in 2009. Okay. So I used to cross that. I missed it.
I went to Delhi in November and ran away from Delhi.
हाँ मैं भी एक हफ्ते में होने लग
So
जाती
the AQI in DC when I left was 35. AQI in Delhi was 500 plus that same week. And we have the Fiki AGM that takes
Yes,
place.
yes, yes,
So
yes.
I have said no more AGMs. I can't deal with. You can't breathe.
Yeah.
Imagine 500 plus.
मैंने मम्मी को बोल दिया था ये
And I have asthma, so I don't know what's going on.
God.
No, you should not. November, December, don't even touch Delhi. I don't
It's
have
really
asthma.
bad here. So
March April is fine I think.
I don't have asthma and I couldn't breathe. I had a mask. My doctor told me wear a mask when you get out of the aircraft. Cannot talk.
Yeah, it's horrible.
And you know that whole grey, Delhi is in this grey air, and people are jogging and running and going on bikes without masks.
अरे my mom is opening all the windows. She's like ताज़ी हवा आने लगी. मैंने कहा ताज़ी
हवा
हवा
नहीं है,
कहाँ?
जहरीली हवा
जहरीली हवा कि नहीं तुम्हारा इधर फिर बेकार है. हमेशा रेड रहता है. Mom is like typical Delhi. But so lovely meeting. Where do you live in DC?
Yeah, near Park, Woodley Park.
Oh, you're in Woodley Park. We were so close to getting a place in Woodley Park.
This is a nice neighborhood.
Yeah, it's just they didn't have a dishwasher. That was a deal breaker for us.
You know, an apartment without a dishwasher in this country?
Yeah, yeah.
that is
yeah.
rare.
Very rare.
No, on DuPont there's so many apartments.
Really?
Yeah. Because everyone wants to live on DuPont because of the area.
I'm next to the zoo, so I went on Monday. I went
the
on
panda?
Monday to see the panda. Only one was out, the other one was sleeping inside. Very cute.
I went in early. They started the program at 6 a.m. When the first
The 24th of Jan.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Really happy I did it.
So I I've learned this in all Indian related events, they heat up the room. So the other day I went to ORF and I won thermals that day. I thought I was going to have a heat stroke. It was so hot.
Yeah, I'm wearing your thermals.
No, I've learned no thermals for any Indian.
It's kind of a small space.
Yeah.
The ORF that day was full and they had heat. If you go to the embassy also here, they've got Delhi summer temperature. You go and sit in the room, it is so hot. And they
Delhi
say,
summer temperature.
yeah, they've all come from Delhi.
Yeah.
So irrespective of the weather, they're like, yeah, so I go and they say, you're feeling hot? I said, yeah, I'm dying. They wear light summery outfits when you go to the embassy and keep removing one layer. Okay, now the 3 layers off and
I stopped waiting my last embassy. I missed that 26 January event because I missed the dates.
You thought it was on 26.
I thought
wasn't.
it was on 26. It was on 24.
usually it's on 26th at the embassy.
Yeah.
Okay, but this year the ambassador decided to have it before because he wanted to call a big crowd. You see the embassy, right? If you've been there, it's that room is small, very small.
There's no question.
And everybody's telling me the food was so good. Why didn't you come? They had Rogan Josh and the what?
They had good food. They had good. Usually they have this enormous Punjabi samosas, which you don't get even in Delhi. So big and fat.
Full dinner.
Yeah, that's good.
I remember the 15th August. That happened at Ambassador's house. Yes, he's spoken in everywhere. I Very true.
Not once, sometimes if it's very high level, you have an English word that is breaking. But he had no English word that day.
Yeah, he doesn't. He's very.
No, when Rajnath Singh came, he used one English word, manufacturing. That day I understood 70%.
What is manufacturing in Hindi, by the way?
No, he used it in English.
What is the Hindi word? Maybe he does all. He also does it. Yeah, I don't.
I'm sure Rajnath would know.
No, because supposed to be an ambassador, and his Hindi is beautiful. Yes. It's very pure. And then after that, Rajnath Singh did his Madhya Pradesh Hindi. So whole audience was just like, what the hell is happening?
You were there.
Yeah.
How come you didn't meet?
Yeah, we are also there.
We were not there.
There were
A lot of people.
Yeah, there were a lot of. They had good food there. Also.
Yeah, but people have been throwing themselves for this food.
Yeah, there was like.
I came back, I was so disgusted, fighting, and I loved.
That's a diaspora thing, no? When you.
No, I make sure I'm there for all of these things. Now anyway, we have a new DCM coming in the next few months.
Oh, ma'am, it's really
She said that now there's 1 month we got Prime Minister's. Otherwise she would have left this week or last week.
She's a very avid yoga.
Really?
Some of the staff members. Oh, she was leading the whole crowd. Na? उसने yoga किया था
I
ना board
did that and all I don't know.
She was leading the whole. I like the jacket. My favorite.
Khan Market. So I get all this only in Delhi.
Yeah.
So I decided to stop wearing the Himalayan because I wanted the Indian ethnicity. After Indian Chamber of Commerce, so I went to Delhi this time I bought 7 jackets. Yeah, so now I can wear them. Otherwise I had only one and every photograph I would be this one jacket. Okay? Okay, so this time I have got variety.
I love these. I had some from Anokhi, but not yours.
But Khan Market, you know, the middle, the gully is there. There's a shop which sells only these jackets.
I will definitely go this time. My parents are coming this time. They're coming.
Very hot.
You know, Delhi just a feel.
With clean air.
With clean air. Delhi, this is Delhi with clean air.
Very nice. No, but I love DC. DC is so beautiful. No? You're lucky you grew up here.
Yeah, you are lucky you grew up here.
Very nice.
When I was growing up in Delhi, Delhi was quite alright actually. With Delhi.
How did you leave China? Oh, to study?
No, we were working there.
Both of you are posted there.
Yeah. We were trained everywhere. They would come with us to every occasion and vacation. I remember we were going to Shanghai Disneyland and our cab stopped and then 5 cars surrounded us suddenly.
So मतलब पूरा
Like a movie. It was a movie scene. And then guess what happened? We got out the car with cops and they like signed. Every document is in Chinese. Like what? Just sign.
You don't read.
No, we
Now
we do, but at that time it
reading
was very,
Chinese is still
like
a problem.
early in the
So
6 months into.
they said you're a journalist, so you have to sign that you will not report anything from Shanghai. Like we're on a vacation. So we just signed it, but we will start like for good 5 minutes.
They know
They
everything.
know everything. They know everything.
Even this is a deep state.
Yeah. Here,
US, China are all deep state. India is not a deep state.
I mean, every time.
India is like a lot of.
No, but now they're doing it with Digi Yatra. So what income tax department is doing is, with Digi Yatra, they know where you have traveled through the year. And if your returns are not, like you're showing unnatural, whatever. So they're trying to connect air travel with your income tax, which I think is bad. But India started that.
They know everything.
How are you? Good to see you. How are you?
Congratulations on
I'm good to see you. Thank you.
How are you? Good to see you made it out.
Yes, yes. Too much of a US India aficionado to miss it.
Well, yeah, I know the brave ones. Let me say hi to Vivek Lalo. You're a trooper.
Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for braving the snow and the weather outside. And, welcome to a very timely set of panels on US-India relations under Trump 2.0. I'm Akshay Kirtidas here at USISPF, and a very opportune time to have these discussions as Prime Minister Modi is soon entering American airspace. Just a few housekeeping rules. These sessions are being recorded. They are on the record with media present here, so do bear that in mind as you begin to ask questions. We do not have handheld microphones going around, so you'll have to be a little loud because that little microphone there has to capture your questions so our camera crew can pick it up. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our media partners, NDTV, CNBC, 18, and of course, the generosity of our sponsor, Motwani Jadeja Foundation. So thank you. Without further ado, for opening remarks, I'd like to call on President and CEO, Dr. Mukesh Ahuja. Thank you.
Welcome. I guess a bit of snow scares a lot of people away. And but we will have more people coming as we continue. I just want to make sure we're on schedule. I think this is a very important visit from the perspective of US-India relationship. And I was in Delhi, I just came back yesterday briefing. And I think the overall thinking is how do you deepen the relationship between the two countries, both from an economic trade perspective, geopolitical perspective, and technology transfer continuing, defense procurement going up, and then people to people. I think the big concern, what I heard is while we go focus on driving this relationship closer with the US, will Trump make a deal with China and left us hanging as far as India goes? So there is a sense of, yes, we'll move forward, but at the same time, there's some sense of trepidation also to ensuring, because India has to live with China in every aspect, and so they don't want to burn bridges there, but at the same time, they feel that China will continue to be aggressive, assertive in the region. The Indian economy is growing, but it has slowed down. The sentiment is that we need to work harder. I saw Sitaraman, finance minister, actually getting more and more institutional investors to come in. In the last budget, they basically upped the ante on insurance 100% owned by the foreign companies, but they still have not changed the policy requirement on management and board structure. And I made it very clear, unless you change that, no company is going to put billions of dollars and then that's controlled by a board which they don't control it. So I think they're going to work on that. On the defense side, I would say that there is a sense of, I don't know if you saw remarks by the Indian Air Force general basically complaining HAL not being able to deliver. And so there's a lot of pressure on part of the government to secure. And I thought they'll make an announcement in France, but they did not. Looks like they're keeping something here for the US announcement also. So I think the sentiment is strong. The way we see the relationship, the event happening for 24 hours, it goes smooth. Where we see certain risk is once you have a press conference, and that's not controllable. So we'll see what happens there. But overall, they are optimistic. The Indian side, they feel that they can make a deal with Trump and move forward. So once again, thank you, and I will continue with the process. And people are still coming in. I will keep on adding them here. And thank you for taking the time. Thank you.
The word tariffs gets thrown around easily, but what exactly do they mean? What are the ramifications of the larger trade relationship? And as India Energy Week commenced, an opportune time to talk about the US-India synergy in energy and refueling the partnership. So without further ado, I want to call our first panel, Mark Linscott, USISPF Mark Linscott, who is former US Assistant USTR at South and Central Asia, Ernie Thrasher, Chief Executive at Excoal Energy and Resources, and Lisa Schroeder, Global Director of Trade and Investment Policy at Dow, and they've been in conversation with Parishit Luthra at CNBC TV18. Thank you.
Great to be with everyone here. It's been a great 24 hours for me and a great learning as well. I landed yesterday to cover the Prime Minister's visit to Washington D.C. The first meeting between Modi and Trump since the new Trump administration took over. Very interesting times, and the whole thing that I'm hearing over here is that China is dominating Donald Trump's mind right now. So where does Prime Minister Modi and India really figure in? And what kind of deal would we offer? That is something everyone is waiting for, and it's quite clear there will be some tariffs on India. How will India maneuver that, minimize the impact? I guess that's something we'll have to think of. But we've got a great panel here. I'll begin with Ernie. Ernie, when it comes to Excoal Energy, you've been reducing your business in China over the last few years. What are you really expecting as far as the India-US trade partnership goes? There is conversation about having a limited trade deal. There was a conversation in Trump 1.0 as well, but it did not happen. But what would be good for US energy companies this time around?
Well, thank you. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for the energy trade between the US and India to grow. The US, one of the largest exporters of energy in the world, in the form of LNG, the largest exporter of coal. And an exporter of the technology that allows you to consume those products in an environmentally sustainable fashion. So we had I would say, a very good momentum of increasing energy trade during the first Trump administration. The last 4 years, the U.S. administration had focused more on renewables. There was a dialogue with India, but fossil fuels were somewhat pushed to the side. So I'm very excited that we're back in business again with the U.S. and India, and these are commodities that move in large volumes at reasonably good prices. So they put an immediate dent in any trade deficit, and I think that's what the current president wants to do. He wants to see action items that produce results. And I think the biggest and the quickest way to reduce what is not a significant trade deficit, but a trade deficit, would be for India to increase its purchases of U.S. raw materials and U.S. energy products.
You know, It's interesting that you raised that because just yesterday I was in conversation with Rich McCormick,
Yeah.
the Republican lawmaker, and his first line was, my challenge to India is stop buying Russian oil. You cannot be financing the war in Ukraine, stop it now. So when the message is so clear, clearly there is going to be an attempt by the Indian government to increase energy imports from the US, and we are expecting, there are conversations behind long-term LNG contracts, contracts to buy more crude oil from the US. Give us a sense of what's your India business like at the moment, and what kind of uptick are you expecting after the Modi-Trump meeting?
Yes, well, our current business in India is quite minimal because we shifted a lot of our business to Europe following the Russia-Ukraine war. But over the years, we've had substantial volumes of business in India, $300, $400 million worth of trade in India, 35 or 40% of our business. And it can quickly go back there again. You know, commodities, whether it's LNG, coal, or other raw materials, they can easily be shifted from one region to another. And I think the issue in India, as you mentioned, they're not only purchasing Russian oil, but they're refining it and sending the gas to the U.S. or to Europe. And we're seeing the same thing with Russian coal. India is a large purchaser of Russian coal. So I think the tolls are there for a deal. I think, you know, I've had the honor of meeting the Prime Minister several times. I'm always impressed with his knowledge of details, and he's well briefed and very knowledgeable about topics at hand. So I think he'll go into the meeting with some ideas, and certainly the President never seems to be short of ideas in a meeting. So I'm quite excited about the opportunity here.
You know, I'm not sure whether we should expect too much from this visit because they're meeting for the first time, and they would be probably spending maybe 4 to 5 hours altogether, and this is probably a day and a half long visit, a very tight working visit. But Mark, do you get a sense that India would like to just make sure that this visit goes off well? There are no reciprocal tariffs immediately, and if there are any reciprocal tariffs, the impact is minimal.
Yeah, frankly, I think that the ambition might be a bit higher than that. Mukesh at the start laid out the priority areas and the room to grow in those areas. I think there will be a lot of focus on trade for a lot of obvious reasons. 4 weeks into the administration, predictably, we've had a lot of action on the trade front. We've had new tariffs applied to China. We've had threats of tariffs against China and against Canada and Mexico. We now have new tariffs on steel and aluminum. Very familiar territory because we had tariffs on steel and aluminum during the first Trump administration, and now comments from the president on reciprocal tariffs. So it's day to day. It's predictable that it's going to be unpredictable in terms of what to expect on the trade front. That said, though, I do think the time's been right. I've been writing and talking about this forever for the two sides to up their game on trade, to really accomplish something in terms of negotiating a big trade deal. Trade economics, but more specifically trade has lagged behind other aspects of the relationship, certainly the geostrategic and defense cooperation areas. We started doing that work during the first Trump administration. I was a career trade guy, but I was the first U.S. Negotiator on that trade deal, that GSP deal, that eventually fell apart, but working for Bob Lighthizer at the time. And that was a really interesting moment because for the first time the two sides really bellied up to the table, got a lot of things out on the table in terms of negotiations, got very close to a trade deal. I think learned a lot in terms of working together bilaterally, and much of my career has been in Geneva and the WTO with India, which was always not good. Bilaterally, the two sides found that they could work together. I am confident that they will come out of this meeting tomorrow with a mutual pledge to launch negotiations on a big trade deal, bigger than the last time. It will be ambitious, the timing is likely to be ambitious, and I just sense that there's a real commitment on both sides. And things are different from the last time around in the sense that it will be a larger group of issues, allows for more trade-offs, more creativity in terms of concessions, more transactional approaches, and as I was noting before, they know each other better now.
They know each other better. In fact, just on the day of the union budget, I was speaking to Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal, who negotiated that trade deal with Lighthizer in the first Trump administration, and his word was, we are clearly in favor of having a robust trading partnership with India. They did not give it a name, but he said that it can be a full trade agreement, it can be multiple trading pacts under one umbrella. But Lisa, to get you in at this stage, currently we hear from sources in the government that there could be 11 to 12 sectors where India could consider lowering tariffs or giving more market access to US companies. Eric Garcetti, the outgoing US ambassador to India, he mentioned that the India-US partnership is great. We're a lovely married couple, but we're not really working up to our potential. What would be your expectation from this visit? If we are discussing a trade pact, what should there be from your perspective?
Well, I appreciate that. It sounds a little bit like we need marriage counseling at the same time. But it's
That's what trade negotiations are.
Very much so. And I think it builds on what Ernie was saying too. When we think about those raw material inputs, there are a lot of common interests. There are common agendas both in the US and India right now. When you look at an all-in energy policy, ease of doing business, regulatory simplification, making sure that we're really enabling and encouraging that environment for domestic production, there are a lot of ways that we can approach that together in a way that really focuses, and I know a lot of governments want to talk about sectors, but when we think about supply chains, chemicals are a really good example. You can look at us as a sector, or you can look at us as the necessary input to make just about everything else, coming from those energy resources as feedstock that help us develop the materials that become mattresses or paint or semiconductor chips. So I do think, to the point that Minister Goyal was raising, when we look at some of these areas around even just kickstarting early negotiations around supply chain agreements, it's a great way of addressing our common challenges, and it has to go beyond tariffs. If we have that common conversation around things like sound science, risk-based regulatory procedures, and customs simplification, so things like quality control orders at the border become an efficient way of managing trade without creating this overly bureaucratic or, quite frankly, just confusing system that can make it that much harder to source those raw material imports into domestic producers in India and the United States. So I think the more we can focus on addressing what are those real commercial common challenges, and that's where we have a huge advantage between the US.
What's the biggest pain point for you in India?
Right now, a lot of it would be some of these import measures that have been implemented against across our industry, particularly because they're just very difficult to manage the process. When we talk about certainty, QCOs are a good example. When they're announced, but then the implementation is in 90 days, or delayed, or postponed. When you have things on the water, it becomes very difficult to manage that process. And not knowing exactly what are consistent application of standards, what are the requirements we need to meet. We are happy to work within a heavily regulated system, but you need the certainty. And that's what's challenging, especially when you're just looking to meet your customers' expectations, including more innovative products that allow them to build that next generation of how they're leading markets.
That's very important, because as you speak about the chemical industry or be it the energy industry, all these contracts that we speak about, these are long-term supply chain contracts which have been probably signed 1 year in advance or 2 years in advance. So to change things around within 90 days or a 45-day period becomes very difficult. Ernie, I know you wanted to come in. Give us your
I was
thoughts.
just going to say, India has a history of having free trade agreements, bilateral free trade agreements. They have one with Australia, they have one with Indonesia. They cover energy sectors, national resource projects. There's nothing that would prohibit them from following that same process with the U.S., and I think that's what the current administration wants. It wants to sit down with a partner and make a deal. And I was just going to say, I think if you look at what this administration's done in the last 3 weeks, I don't think anyone could say that expectations could ever be too high, because they surprise us every day with, kicking it up another level. So I would say that the sky's the limit on what could happen here for the next day.
Again, speaking about what Republican lawmakers have been saying, they're saying that what India should do is reduce tariffs in all areas which are critical for the US from a supply chain perspective, but China has the competitive advantage. How can India go about that? And give us maybe the top 3 or 4 sectors or top 3 or 4 pain points from your perspective.
So to give you an example, India has a 2.75% tariff on US coal. That doesn't apply to Australia or Indonesia because they have a free trade agreement. That's low-hanging fruit to have an immediate deliverable without any real cost to India. I think there are issues, taxation issues that need to be addressed. And then I think in the energy space, especially in the gas space, it's infrastructure, pipelines. How can the U.S. help India develop an infrastructure network to take advantage of additional supplies of LNG? Because as all of us, there's a view that the fossil fuel industry is against making the world clean and against climate change. Nothing could be further from the truth. We all live and breathe the same air. But I think there's a lot that India can gain from a technology standpoint from private companies and U.S. technology coming in to help them make this energy transition to what may be a reduced emissions environment rather than trying to just have a radical change that is very costly to the Indian economy.
Right.
Sorry, just to add to that really quick, and I think what you're hearing too is that there's a real common sense across the industry as to what those opportunities might be. If we instead look at them as opportunities instead of pain points, we can identify exactly where some of those commercial constraints that are prohibiting us from doing more with each other, whether it's across certain supply chains in the energy industry, chemical industry, downstream producers. It's a benefit of an organization like USISPF. I mean, it brings together that common business community to put together what some of those early wins might be, and I think that's an advantage both of our governments need to think about. What can industry bring to the table that are quick wins, early opportunities to address these challenges, and do more with trading partners we already have so much investment in trade with?
Right. So Mark, what do you think will be the ambition this time? A full FTA, and FTA negotiations can take years. Europe was almost, with Europe we had negotiations for 15 years, they fell through. We're now having negotiations. We had a quick deal with UAE, with Australia, but do you think the ambition is for a full free trade agreement or a limited trade deal right now?
I think it, well, one, I think it will be big, huge.
Trump likes it.
What it's called, yes, absolutely. What it's called probably doesn't matter that much. If it's a free, and I wouldn't rule out a free trade agreement. A free trade agreement is complicated because that brings in the Congress in terms of having legislative authority to negotiate free trade agreements and then to give the Congress the opportunity to vote on it, yes or no. There was a deal done in the first Trump administration which was a bit like an FTA, but it was called simply the U.S.-Japan trade agreement. It included tariff cuts on both sides, which normally in the WTO trade rules only are allowed for FTAs, but the Trump administration broke some glass and did things differently. and negotiated something that allowed for preferential tariffs between them. So I could imagine a scenario in which they launch negotiations, they don't say it's an FTA, but tariffs are very much on the table and involving multiple sectors and certainly going up beyond tariffs as Lisa was pointing out. But Ernie made a really important point. There was a period in which all market access negotiations, for the most part, lowering tariffs, was done in the GATT and then the WTO. Those days are long gone. And we have now a reality that's been in place for some time in which countries negotiate bilaterally or regionally to lower tariffs. And as a consequence, there are lower preferential tariffs among those trading partners. It's always been difficult in the US to negotiate those kinds of trade agreements. But the last administration, which did some good things with India, had some limited successes, but it made it clear it was not negotiating on tariffs. Market access was off the table, and as a consequence, the playing field became less level for US exporters. As Australia and India got together, or UAE, or the EFTA countries, Norway, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and Iceland, as they negotiated with India and got lower tariffs, then there was more of a differential between what the US had in the Indian market and what those countries have. So that's got to be critical, is to negotiate our own deal to lower tariffs. But it's got to go beyond that. It's got to be the non-tariff barriers, the QCOs and many other things that are on the table. It's got to extend to services. And that was not part of last.
When you speak about services, what the Indian government has been saying, and they have conveyed this very clearly to the Trump administration, is that we will take back illegal Indians staying illegally in America, but at the same time, we support having more avenues for legal migration. Could that figure in the trade agreement in any form? And if India wants our deported Indians to be treated better, do you think the Trump administration will seek something in return?
Well, I venture into immigration issues very cautiously for a lot of good reasons, but it's hard to say whether they might be part of a trade agreement. I think they will be part of trade negotiation because I'm reasonably confident that the Indian side will bring these issues to the table and want to discuss them, and will want to explore what can be done in this area, whether it's raising numbers or making the process less challenging, less administratively burdensome. I can see going down that path, but I'm confident that India will raise those. And I'm confident because last time when I was negotiating with India, India was raising those issues, and we had discussions and we had follow-up. We'll see. A negotiation is going to be really, really hard. I've been an optimist. I see this very much as a bull market on trade between the United States and India, negotiating a trade agreement. But I don't want to pretend that it won't be hard. It will be very difficult. There will be drama. There will certainly be threats of tariffs. There may be actual new tariffs. There will be disruptions. But I think the two sides, but that's common in trade negotiations. But I think there really will be determination on both sides, and particularly at the leaders level. Having the leaders directly involved and pushing their negotiators really makes the difference. So, I'm confident it can be done.
Right. Lisa, my next question to you would be about China. US companies have been delinking from China, but it's taking time. And many organizations have said that it's going to take years, maybe 10 to 15 years to delink to the extent that Donald Trump wants. But if India wants to rise up to the China plus one opportunity, what more does it need to do right now, according to you?
Well, I think this builds on what Mark was talking about. It's not a full FTA agreement. If we think about things like critical supply chains, And India was really constructive in those negotiations, even under IPEF for the last couple of years. But how do we actually operationalize that? And that's one of the challenges we've seen with a lot of governments. There's very much a focus on the end product, but supply chains, that's a lot of production across that, starting from the energy resources through chemical products. So you can't just have lithium and make a battery. There's a lot of components that go to that. And that's one of the areas of opportunity. If you start maybe building block agreements around those, identify what are those materials, whether it's semiconductor chips, pharmaceuticals, construction materials. What are the industries it's in our mutual interest to be growing? How do I identify what are the components, critical components of those supply chains? And then focus on those areas of commercial opportunity, our common interest in that ease of doing business. To identify those specific areas of, this is what slows those investments down. This is how we source more to each other. How are we looking at this from how do we advantage rather than restrict? That's a great way. We would see that as a great path forward of demonstrating how we're each other's trusted trade partners.
Right. My final set of questions, and Ernie, if I could ask you, we had great and tough trade negotiations last time, but there was no X factor. There is an X factor this time, or the Musk factor. Elon Musk is very much a part of the Trump administration. Nobody knows how long, but currently he's got Donald Trump's ear. He is his advisor. He's heading the Department of Government Efficiency. What's going to be his influence on any trade talks with India?
Well, first of all, I have a bias to the X factor from XCall. But I think it's an outside set of eyes, an objective set of eyes. I think it will find its walls because eventually you can only break glass so long and then you start hitting concrete. So I don't know where that line is at, but I think for now, I think the administration has taken a view, my personal view, that this is a blank sheet of paper and let's start from like zero budgeting and figure out what we build up. Again, very hard to change something that has been built over 250 years, 300 years. But I think most people, and especially if you get into the heartland of America, are excited to see this today. And of course, those are the people that were the big supporters to put Donald Trump in the presidency. So I think he's playing to his political strength.
Right. So that would be my final question to you, Mark. When we speak about Musk, he's somebody who has tremendous business interest in China, a huge manufacturing base in China. He's been speaking to the Chinese government to have a greater rollout of autonomous vehicles. Keeping all of that in mind, when you have someone who's got such deep interest in China, how will that impact Trump's policies vis-a-vis India? Could at some point there be a deadlock? Do you think there will be a pushback from Trump's own people when it comes to high tariffs or pushing India on tariffs?
Well, number one on trade, I think the president himself will be the top negotiator on the U.S. side. So, we certainly will, with members of the cabinet directly involved, I do anticipate the U.S. Trade Rep's office, Jameson Greer, will lead those negotiations. And things are beginning to play out that way.
In fact, appointments are also taking place even now.
Yeah, and I spent much of my career at USTR, so I'm hugely biased, but USTR, in fact, is one of those agencies that you would think might be a model in terms of what DOGE is looking at, because it's lean and mean, it's very small, it's cabinet level, but you're talking several hundred people in the organization who are coordinating trade policy and conducting trade negotiations. So it kind of fits with what Musk has been doing so far. But Trump cares about trade. Tariffs for decades have been a preoccupation for him. So I think he will lead the negotiation, and he's going back to the last administration, the first Trump administration, he talked about India, and he clearly was an advocate for there being a trade agreement. So I think it will be a hard negotiated, hard fought agreement at the end of the day. It may be phased, there may be interim agreements over time, but I don't see China as being parallel with India in terms of what may happen on the trade front, and what the limits are in terms of trade negotiations.
All right, so fantastic talking to all of you about the US-India trade partnership, what we can expect over the next few weeks, months, or maybe in the next 1 year. But clearly there is a vision that there should be more trade, there should be lower tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers on the Indian side, and more predictability in policy making, and more energy imports from the US as well. Thank you once again to all of you.
Thanks, Parikshit, Mark, Lisa, and Ernie. Is there any Q&A? Please get to our panel. Otherwise, we can commence with a small break, and then we will begin our second panel at 2:30 sharp. If there are any Q&A, please. That is, if there are questions. Just bear in mind, we only have that microphone there, so you'll have to speak up a little bit, but name and affiliation. If any questions, guys.
Ernie, you will have to come back.
I'm happy to. We missed you.
Yeah. Mr. Cunningham.
Sure. Thank you so much. First of all, having watched Parikshit for so long on small screens across oceans, such a pleasure to have you here in the snows of Washington and to see you in person. So
glad to see you,
thank you for being here and joining us. I've been watching this relationship for 15 years or more. And one thing that I've seen change is the increasing importance of the Indian American community here in the United States, especially in the political world. Let's not forget, the elections last November, the Democratic candidate was a woman of Indian American origin. The Republican vice president's candidate's wife was Indian American. You had Indian Americans on both sides of the top of the ticket. It's remarkable. This year, I predict we'll see Indian Americans running for Senate and possibly running for additional seats as governor in the US. This gives India a tailwind that really no other country that Donald Trump might be negotiating with, jousting with. I think he will be, my own assessment, I'm curious what the group thinks, is that as Trump faces off against Modi, he'll be very conscious, how will this play with the Indian American community here in the United States, who are up for grabs. They're Republicans, they're Democrats, they really straddle the aisle quite nicely. I think he'll be very interested in how does he cause this relationship to strengthen his political bonds with the Indian American community. I just wonder if any of you see that as being a useful backdrop for trade and other negotiations with India.
It's an important point because one, it's a big vote bank, and secondly, a big tax-paying community as well. Mark, would you like to take that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, and one I haven't thought about in depth in terms of a factor, but it makes a lot of sense. And it's certainly what I've seen in the first Trump administration and this time so far is that the president seems likely to want to approach India in terms of reaching an agreement and it being mutually beneficial and it not simply being about taking aggressive action and not really being interested in doing a trade deal. So it might contrast with Europeans, for example, or maybe even Canada. It's been kind of remarkable to try to assess that dynamic where, I mean, sometimes it seems like it's mostly about raising the tariffs as opposed to leveraging them. And I do feel that the approach with India is certainly threatening tariffs, but very much leveraging them, and the objective being a trade agreement. And should sell well on both sides. It's clear, I mean, you referenced Mr. Goyal before, and he's been talking about a big trade deal since the first Trump administration. He tried during the Biden administration. The Biden administration just was not doing those big trade deals. So I think there's a very willing partner. I mean, frankly, I think the two are very willing partners. And the issue you raised in terms of what we've seen with the Indian American population in this country, which has grown so much and created so much vibrancy. And in fact, I spent a career at USTR, but over the years I found that so many of my colleagues, mostly American-born, were of Indian Asian descent. At the table with me, with India being on the other side. So it's a fascinating dynamic.
Right. Thank you. Any more questions?
Yeah. So I'm Sahil, co-founder and CEO of T2, based in Bay Area. How is your view on the nuclear power plants being now opened up in India? And because initially when India became nuclear power, the US was not viewing it in a classic way. But now the way it is opening up for the private sector and for energy consumption increasing high in India, what's your view on those sides?
Who would like to take that up?
I think nuclear power is a cornerstone of the transition to whatever the new energy future may be. And I think the U.S. has great technology, other countries have great technology. But I think it's a tremendous opportunity as part of a trade agreement for U.S. nuclear technology for nuclear power in India. And people talk about zero carbon forms of energy. We've had nuclear power since 1945, and I think it's one of the, it should be the cornerstone of an energy program. So I'd be very excited about something happening.
Very interesting that you raised that, because we just signed a declaration of intent with the French government to have a partnership on small modular reactors. Do you hope that could also figure in any kind of trade agreement with between US and India as well?
Absolutely. I think, again, if you look at the three big builders of nuclear power, probably four, US, Korea, France, and China. But the technology's here. It was developed here 60 years ago. So I think we as Americans are missing an opportunity by not promoting it.
Well, and actually on that point, as a company that's actually investing in, we're piloting an SMR project down in the Gulf. It's a great example to combine both questions. When you think about that expertise, companies that are actually doing this and applying this to manufacturing so that we can produce less carbon-intensive product, that expertise of the investors here and in India, combined with the constituency of Indian Americans here, that is a very strong group to take opportunity in the window that we have now to be proactive about what we want to see in the deals. Our two leaders are going to come away with a great statement from these days, and hopefully some really strong commitments. But ultimately, that's a framework for us to take advantage of operating in. Bring these concrete ideas to the table in a way that says, here's what we can get done, and here's where you're going to see results. And I think there's a lot of momentum to make that happen. And that's a way of being not just reacting to all the other announcements that we're seeing, but how do we get proactive about what's an agenda we can all care and benefit from?
Great. On Lisa's point, on the joint statement, what we expect as outcomes here, I read through the U.S.-Japan joint statement associated with Prime Minister's visit, and I was surprised at how lacking it was on specifics and real commitments. I think this joint statement, the Prime Minister Modi's and President Trump's joint statement, is going to be much meatier. I mean, there will be real substance and real commitments and a real plan going forward.
Right. And he is a president who likes concrete outcomes whenever he has any kind of dealing or bilateral talks with anybody. But Nan here wants to ask a question.
Hi, my name is Nayan. I'm with Voice of America. I'm also an editor for the Wilson Center. And I write about critical minerals diversification efforts, a topic which I have not covered. Do you think, given this administration's priorities on national security more than climate, and India had recently signed an MOU with the Biden administration, the previous one, on diversification of critical minerals. India is not a big player in it, but it's still, there's a lot of potential in rare earths and other sectors. Do you think the Indian side and even others in the space like Australia or Japan should try and reframe this from not from a climate or energy transition perspective to the more national security, because it has defense applications, the issue of critical minerals. So do you think there is a need to reframe that, which the administration would be more willing to listen to and collaborate with going forward?
I don't think it has to be either or. I think it can be both. And critical minerals cross a spectrum of sectors, not just national security and climate. But I think the one thing you find in the world is rare earths are not that rare. The problem is processing them and getting them into a final state for use. And I wouldn't rule out what India may have. I think there's a lot of testing and exploration in India that's hasn't really defined all the natural resources India has. It's a country that's blessed with a tremendous amount of natural resources. You may find some of those critical minerals or rare earths there. So I would say both. I don't think you have to make an either or decision.
But yeah, it could be clearly a part, and it has been a talk of on supply chain partnership and critical minerals. We've been having that conversation with the Biden administration, which is also there under ISET. Do you expect this to be a part of the trade agreement as well?
I don't know that it matters. I expect it will be a priority area for both sides. It probably will be reframed in some ways, but I think Ernie's point is it could be either. It doesn't really. I mean, it's important. It's critical. Whether it happens on the trade side or whether it happens more on the defense cooperation side, whether it's NSC versus USTR, it doesn't really matter necessarily. It will be different though, because in the Biden administration, there was so much focus on the legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, and that's what India really wanted, rather than an MOU with Commerce Department that was all about working together. It was having access to this market and the domestic content requirements associated with IRA. Now it's hard to know what happens next with that. So, I'm sure there will be different approaches, but it will be a priority area for both sides, whether it's through a trade negotiation or through other aspects of the relationship.
Right. Lisa, as Bernie was also pointing out, China does not dominate the world's lithium reserves, but the majority of the refining of lithium happens in China. What can India do to rise up to that challenge, and how can US and India have a closer supply chain partnership of critical minerals?
Well, I think that's a great example, and I fully agree with what Ernie was saying. It's an all-in. And when we think about that processing, again, mutual interest, both governments want to grow more economic activity. Sharing that technology, creating the opportunities where we're not just exploring, extracting, and mining, but going all the way through to processing and then creating the value chains that go along with. And that's how you get into that broader, it's not its own separate activity. Critical minerals is an essential component of sourcing these supply chains. So the more we can combine that story and look at it from that aspect of how are we growing the economic value chain and securing all those other benefits, whether it's the defense-related, national security, environmental. You could say the same thing about so many different value chains. We focus a lot on waste management, addressing some of the plastic challenges that are out there on the planet. Waste management is an economic model. The more we're investing in recycling, the more we're looking at that material now not as a waste, but as a feedstock, it's how we can create out of this. And I think you can look at so many different value chains the same way.
All right. finally, any more questions, and then maybe we can wrap up the panel.
Prashant, question more for Ernie. I think the Ukraine war showed that energy security is important. And India has abundance of coal and will keep on using that. So from your perspective, what can we do that while energy security is there, we also deal with the environment issues?
So, Mukesh, I think, first of all, I have to give a lot of credit to the current Indian government. They have significantly improved the efficiency, the safety, and the environmental standards of their coal mines and coal production. And they're reaping the benefits of that in additional forms of low-cost energy. But the technology is there. And I think you have to separate. I think people have lost the view that there's a line between pollution and carbon. Most people don't see that line anymore. The technology is there to solve pollution today. It's a multi-decades technology that's proven and cost-effective and reliable. And now we're evolving into how do we solve the carbon problem. And I think what people are missing, and I think India is a good testing ground for this, is I think there's a mitigation effect that could come into play rather than an elimination effect. So India is a prime area for coal gasification. The Prime Minister has talked about that because of the resources it has. There'd be a significant reduction in India's carbon emissions just by gasifying the coal it has. That technology exists today. So again, as I mentioned, it's not only supplying energy to India, but there's a lot of private partnerships that could evolve to apply lower carbon emission technologies to India to allow India needs reliable, competitive sources of energy to grow. And I think over the last few years, people have lost sight of that, and now it's kind of pulling back to find a middle ground that's acceptable to everybody.
All right.
More questions.
Yeah, more questions coming in.
Hi, Jake Kansara. How do we reconcile India's objective to ensure a multilateral global reality as opposed to President Trump's reality that, you know, America is the epicenter of geopolitics? Who do we balance towards, and who do we ensure ultimately comes out as the victor in this debate?
Mark, do you want to take that?
Well, as a trade guy, when you speak of multilateral, I mean that's WTO, the World Trade Organization. I don't see any, certainly of major trading countries, you know, a real impetus or, you know, policy priority to go back to a strong WTO. I don't see that with India. There may be rhetoric, but, you know, as again, I negotiated a lot with India in Geneva, and you know, the integrity of the system was not necessarily kind of the top goal. Now at WTO, I just wrote this yesterday for the Hindra Foundation. I mean, WTO is pretty irrelevant in this space, and you know, the U.S. contributed to that, India contributed to that, China contributed to that, many countries. It's not, you know, it wasn't just a U.S. phenomenon. So, you know, again, in the trade sphere, I just don't see that being a question of victors and you know, whose vision plays out, because I think the vision of almost everyone these days is we're going bilaterally, we're going regionally, we're not going to Geneva to solve these problems.
Khushbu also had a question.
Yeah, I just, if I remember correctly, I think in the beginning we heard something on the lines that there was some anxiety in India over President Trump signing a big grand deal that we have been talking about over months now with China, and then Indian interests being sidelined. During this visit, do you think there could be some sort of, you know, Prime Minister Modi seeking some reassurances? We've been waiting for President Trump to talk to President Xi since last week, and that phone call did happen, as we all know, despite being announced. What kind of reassurances do you think that India is seeking in terms of, President Trump not signing this grand deal with China that in a way sidelines India's interests or hurts India's interests in some way, specifically when it comes to the trade issue and the border dispute that India has with China? We have seen some intelligence being given to India on that clashes that happen after that as well. So I just want to get a sense from you on the kind of reassurances and what from what prism do Trump 2.0 really see India when it comes to competing with China, tackling China in the region, but also when it comes to trade. There could be a grand deal. China is the second largest importer of pork and beef. So India is not. It's an exporter. So how do you see those balances coming into this visit? I'm very curious about that. Thank you.
I'll just make one comment, and it might surprise people. India is a democracy. China is an autocracy. I think Modi has the ability to move quicker than Xi does, even though you would think the opposite. So, I lived almost minute by minute the last U.S.-China trade dispute, and it lasted almost 2 years, like 20 months. Well, I don't think, there may be a grand deal coming, but I don't think it's coming quickly. And Ron probably knows, were there 12 or 13 meetings or dialogues between the two trade groups to get to what became the Phase 1 trade group. So I think Prime Minister Modi has more room to move quicker than President Xi has. And that would be, I think, counterintuitive to the two forms of government. But I think Xi has more internal forces to gut to consider than Modi has.
I would agree. I mean, I think there's a greater likelihood of the U.S. doing a trade agreement with India that sidelines China than the reverse. And in terms of reassurances, I expect it's more reassurances about tariffs being applied to India, particularly if it's a reciprocal tariff approach. But, I just in the broadest of terms, my sense is the Trump administration is a bit more focused with China on decoupling, more decoupling. With India, it's becoming closer and integrating the economies more. So that's my take.
Right. A point that Mukesh had made a little while back, that Donald Trump is going to seek a deal with India that he can use for bargaining with China. Would that be your concern as well?
It hasn't been. I think negotiating with India on a trade deal is for the sake of a closer relationship with India. And there can be some China dynamics, but I think it's centrally the importance to both sides of becoming closer. So, and I would predict these new tariffs that have been applied to China remain in place for quite some time, and there's even a likelihood that more tariffs will follow against China.
Right. So thank you so much, Ernie, Lisa, and Mark for that conversation, and the audience for those brilliant questions. Those were some issues that we didn't touch upon in our panel discussions, and it was great to talk about that as well. So thank you everyone in the audience, and thanks to our honorable panel as well.
Thank you once again, Ernie, Mark, Lisa, and Parikshit. One more round of applause. Thank you. Please feel free to seat. We're going to begin shortly with our second panel. You can help yourself to some drinks and refreshment at the back. Our second panel touches on defense and security. And we're going to shuffle up a protocol on our second panel.
as well versed with these. There's Mr. Money Renzer. He's more into that. Yeah, I have so many things on the government side here that keep me busy.
We must meet sometime when we're in India.
Yeah.
Great. See you.
Okay, I think if everyone's more or less settled, we'll commence with our second panel. The US-India defense relationship and the strategic partnership has been sort of this codified now as the most important strategic partnership in the 21st century, and the priorities are towards being open Indo-Pacific as the Quad recently celebrated its 20th year anniversary, and the relationship also grows in key areas of critical and emerging tech, particularly with defense. To kind of unpack the future of the defense-security relationship under Trump 2.0, I'm delighted to be joined by Vikram Singh, our in-house defense resident expert, Ingrid Hennick, Vice President of Cohen Group, Dr. Vivek Lal, Chief Executive at Gender Atomics, and Sahil Chawla, Founder and CEO of T2. And of course, they'll be in conversation with Nikunj Garg, Managing Editor of NDTV. So, Nikunj, whenever you're ready, you can commence. Thank you.
Yes, I think we can start straight away. Prime Minister Modi is about to touch down in Washington D.C. a few hours from now. How do you see this visit coming along? How do you see he's amongst obviously the first leaders of the International Committee of Nations, other than the contingent ones, like the Iranians or the Israelis or the Egyptians. I think I'm told Egyptians are scheduled the next week. Despite the non-contingency, he's amongst the first ones who's arriving here, and obviously they have a personal rapport also from the carrying on from the first term President Trump. How do you see this going forward, in terms of strategic cooperation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, and thank you to USISPF. Very happy to join my wonderful colleagues on the panel. Look, it's a pretty clear signal. I mean that India is a high priority for Trump 2.0. The President personally invited the Prime Minister in a phone call. The Prime Minister readily accepted. I think it's earlier than you normally see this kind of visit, and I think that's a testament to the fact that this relationship and the high ambition each country has for the relationship as something that's important to their own national interest. I think that's what you see. And I think, as we saw in the last time around with the Trump administration, even difficult issues, I mean, trade issues, there were tariffs, there was the removal of GSP, those sorts of things were there, but those didn't dampen the enthusiasm behind the relationship and the major progress that was made, including in the defense and security space, the conclusion of the most important fundamental defense agreements that underpin the ability for the U.S. to partner closely with a country like India. So I think there's going to be high ambition, and I think they're going to be talking a lot about the region, regional security, the Indo-Pacific, China, defense ties, and high-tech cooperation.
Defense and tech cooperation, usually are a very vexed kind of an issue because technology transfer becomes the most challenging aspect, irrespective of your best intentions, irrespective of the might of the administrations. Bureaucracies being bureaucracies will certainly work in a certain manner. But as far as the early visit of the Prime Minister is concerned, with this you have almost full term of the President Trump in front of you. And the patience and the time that you need to sometimes work on the vexed issues is available.
Thank you. I think you're already seeing that they're stepping into this role where there's been progress made over the last two administrations. So first you had the major defense partner under Obama, and then shortly after, India was put into a different technology category, allowing the easy technology release of dual-use items. During the Biden administration, you have really path-breaking programs like the GE engine deal, where you're looking at 80% tech transfer. That's unheard of. I mean, that's an offer that has not been extended to other countries, and so that's something that has been uniquely offered to India. And I think we're going to see a continuation of that. I think the Trump administration was very forward-leaning in its first term, treating India in this higher category. The rebranding, the fact that it's now the Indo-Pacific, that's the vernacular used here in Washington. You have Indo-PACOM. And we're seeing a lot of really exciting collaboration between our industries. So the private sector, I would say, is at the forefront of that, and they've broken down a lot of those barriers.
And do you think the fact is also this, that this special category status is something that Indians would naturally expect and desire, keeping in mind that India has always been a very responsible power, even when it comes to usage of the military software or any kind of strategic leeway that it has. And going forward, that's the way it's going to be seen, with a special prism of Indo-US ties, not being hyphenated or not being boxed into some kind of a particular area or region or geography.
Yes, I completely agree with what Vikram and Ingrid said here. I think as you look at the relationship, and President Trump and Prime Minister Modi laid a strong, robust foundation in Trump 1.0, and that continued and has continued to grow. But the 6 stakeholder buckets, if you will, that fostered the relationship to be closer and therefore not hyphenated, as you mentioned, would include the political spectrum, and there's a lot of synergies over administrations on that. Then the bureaucratic spectrum, there's a lot more understanding of how the systems work, both in terms of procurement as well as operational aspects, including joint exercises, etc. The third bucket would be academia, and often not spoken about, but academics and think tanks are behind the org charts that make a lot of these things happen. The fourth bucket would be the media and the communications piece, and how the perception of both countries as they're aligning themselves on various elements of the defense relationship. And then, of course, there's also the end users, and I think the end users in both countries are seeing the benefit of this increased synergy as we're looking for a better global secure order. and the Indo-Pacific was mentioned as well. Finally, the industry captains, whether you're talking about the large industries or the medium or small, or the startup communities, I think there has been a sea change in the last few years thanks to the leadership of Prime Minister Modi as well as President Trump and President Biden, and that will just continue to grow.
If you can just pass the line to Sahil. My question would be, in that sense, that defense is one marquee sort of a sector in this entire cooperation. In fact, I was talking to a ranking diplomat yesterday, and he said that if you go back 20 years, there was hardly any cooperation. There was hardly any interoperability, was an unknown term. And now platforms are just one extension of the whole cooperation, whether it is P18, etc. But the whole relationship of the countries has taken such a platform that strategic relationship becomes just one part of it, the entire out of the entire gamut, as our colleague very eloquently described 6 buckets of the relationship. But do you think that defense and the tech transfer still remain the centerpiece of this relationship, or it's just one of them?
I think I would agree this is one of the reason being behind this. India was very much dependent on Russia for the defense technology in past, and eventually last 10 years they have taken effort to go away from Russian platforms, depend on Israeli and French, and now last 4 years, 5 years, the focus with IndusX and I said was to depend on US on tech. And there's a large opportunity for companies, US companies, whether it is GA, Boeing, or Raytheon or Lockheed Martin, to co-develop, co-design, co-manufacture in India, because both the heads, whether it is Prime Minister Modi or Trump, both things like businessmen, and they want to be self-reliant. So there's a large opportunity there to co-manufacture, co-design, and have a separate IP sharing, technology sharing things. And I think the X factor will focus on more technology side in this term. And I believe a lot of technology transfers on both sides will happen. India is also focusing on creating IPs. DRDO is being given mandate. This time the budget has increased from the earlier in defense spend. And India being consumption market for defense and US being the export market, it's a good pair for both the countries.
Good pair, keep it, good pair for both the countries. You see that platforms or the tie-ups, like I said, receiving a further fill-in?
I would imagine, so. The indications from the National Security Advisor, from the new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, have all been that when it comes to Indo-Pacific writ large, things that we've seen recently are likely to be built on. I don't know if there'll be rebranding, I don't know if there'll be new focuses, but I do believe that the fundamental desire to make a technology ecosystem that rivals the commercial technology ecosystem you will have between the United States and India, which is extraordinarily robust. There's not really a major American tech player that doesn't have a huge presence and have India playing a very important role in what they do. And I think the intent is that would be a way for the United States to basically more rapidly innovate and also to potentially compete in the global marketplace, because if you start building more things in India that are defense specific, and if you start in new areas like undersea technologies, and space technologies, and things like that, you might be able to realize some of the cost arbitrage that would let you actually, maybe be competitive in other markets, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, Africa. And I think there's a vision of sort of, India has a vision of making India for the world. I think there is a shared vision of, make India and the US industry cooperating to make for both countries, but also for the world. Whether that can be realized, I think there's a lot of things that would need to happen, but I think that vision is actually pretty robust, and so I expect things to go on.
For that to happen, manufacturing will have to happen in India. Do you think that's possible under Mr. Trump?
It'll be a delicate balance,
yes,
right?
Because he's obviously about making America, not so much in making anywhere outside America.
Right, but I think that there also are potentially benefits that can be derived here in the U.S. you look at the talent base in India, you look at cost savings that can be achieved, the fact that there is manufacturing today, there are global supply chains that exist. It's not an either or. There are a number of countries where, again, take Turkey for example, where we've shifted some supply chains out of it. How can India benefit from that? So I think there's definitely a role, and there's definitely value that India brings to the table. So I think it's a win-win, and I don't think it's just bilateral. I think if we look at this multilaterally, for example, we have a client from Australia that's manufacturing aerostructures in India. And so we're effectively looking at opportunities that go beyond just this bilateral, but certainly in the Quad realm.
I think if it's zero sum anywhere, I think if it's zero sum, making India instead of America, and it's a net, then I think that has a real problem. But a lot of these things, to Ingrid's point, could potentially be more in America, coming along with making in India, because you're increasing the volume.
But you think,
so you would have to make that case, though.
But you think in your mind that the space for that kind of an exercise exists in the minds of the leaders?
Yeah, I think there's the imagination is there to really have this be not just in tech, but in actually manufacturing, in critical minerals,
India,
supply chain security.
I ask you this question because for India, large-scale manufacturing is the panacea that we are probably looking at when it comes to solving the ever-present and ever-looming jobs crisis in that country. And that's a challenge of most developing world.
I think challenge of most of the industrialized world too is that they've lost too much manufacturing and that China has claimed too much manufacturing globally. And I think this becomes a joint battle. In the best scenario, it becomes a joint battle.
And just to add one more point,
yes, please.
There are offers on the table where it is manufacturing lines that could go to India. It may not be viewed as cutting edge technology, but it is. These are systems that are still in place. They're in war fighting scenarios, and so those are job creators. It's exactly your point. This isn't just a strategic decision. It's something that in fact would have economic benefit in India as well. And so that's, whether it's Javelin, the Stryker program, the F-21, there are a number of opportunities that I think could be seized early.
Number of opportunities that can be seized early, says our friend, but as I said, bureaucracies being bureaucracies. Can it be taken forward? But of course, this time we do have an advantage of an early start, and we still have full 4 years of President Trump's term to begin with. Do you think that that's going to help? Do you think that there's a real possibility where we can think of shifting some high-end manufacturing to India, which is in itself able to sort of germinate some kind of large supply chains?
Yeah, I think the building blocks, if you look at the critical and emerging technologies, whether it's artificial intelligence, quantum computing, or any of the various things that have been put on the table in the last few years, those are the building blocks that would tree up into platform level co-production, co-development. And I think we need to elevate the conversation in both countries to a platform level situation where we are leveraging, as Ingrid said, the fact that you have very high-skilled folks in India, as well as the fact that you can have cost efficiencies by
and trust. We are a very trustworthy partner.
Exactly.
When it comes to any kind of high-end technology, there are no allegations of any kind of pilferage, any kind of patent stealing, etc. on our manufacturing, and some very reliable partners have emerged like Tata's.
Absolutely. So there are a lot of synergies, I think, in the end objectives of both countries, but by doing this and elevating the conversation to platform level discussions, because thereby you build out supply chains as well, and it's not just about the large companies, but it's also about the medium and small and the startup companies, and they can all integrate into this. So I see in the next few years that's what's going to happen. I think the businesses on both sides are keen to see the pie grow, so to speak, and I think India and the US are best positioned to leverage that.
Speaking of the bureaucracy, I feel that India has opened up defense for private sectors very soon.
Yes, there are new players like Adani Defense also now joining.
Various players and big players who has been working on And there is another opportunity on the other side if US opens up with the TA compliant, where India is not being part of the country compliant list, being Japan, Singapore, Malaysia, Australia, Canada, Taiwan are part of the country. If India becomes, and then ITA, RCPs, this kind of compliances become easier framework for India. And if bureaucracy can work on this, it will be much more easier to replicate what we have replicated in commercial as the world. There were JVs between Boeing, Tata, Lockheed Martin. A lot of companies have done JVs in India for commercial world, but I think now is the time frame where we can focus solely on defense side.
And I'm glad that, I'm glad that the talk about the AI came into being, because many are describing that 2026 would be a breakaway year, so to say, for AI and its mass replication. Our interest, of course, Indian interest is in the fact that AI is used for the benefit of large swath of our population, to ensure that the benefits reach the last mile, and also to ensure that a qualitative change in the lives of those people come. So you think that with the focus that India is now putting on AI, Prime Minister is just coming here after co-chairing an AI summit, and the American sophistication in the AI, that can also work together other than other sectors where there is already a palpable cooperation.
I mean, I think it's almost an imperative. So, I mean, Prime Minister Modi went to the AI summit. I think you saw Vice President Vance was there, and he made clear that the U.S. focus is shifting from worry and fretting about AI safety, and is moving to AI ambition and AI confidence, and sort of trying to deliver as much as possible, as quickly as possible. And I think if you look at how India has managed, for example, the digital stack and the transformation of the Indian economy from
some of the great examples of UPI and Aadhaar.
UPI, Aadhaar, all these things that are...
Those platforms are complete display of ingenuity.
Right, and that India is trying to offer to the world. Yes. If you look at the engineering pool, if you look at the brain power that's driving AI, a lot of it is Indian. There's a lot of capacity. What India doesn't have is the compute capacity and the architecture, the
probably
infrastructure.
Not at that level where we would want it to be.
Right. But that's probably an area of opportunity for investment as well. And on terms of innovation in AI and partnering, I think it's again, it becomes almost, it's hard to see how you sustain the US lead and the Western lead without India in the face of competition from, for example, from China. So I think it's going to feature prominently. I think there'll be a lot of ambition on what we can do in AI together. And I think a lot of the big Indian players are ready to make those infrastructure plays to help India be more than, it'll definitely be a source of training data. It'll definitely be a source of, there's a lot of data available in India. So if it's in healthcare, or if it's in any number of fields, you can leverage the data in India already. But I think India is going to have more ambition. It's going to want to be a part of the global AI story. Obviously, the Prime Minister doing the summit is a part of that. But I think this is an area where the Indians will come and say, hey, we're ready to level up. And there's a lot of areas right now that are contested in areas of concern. Supply chain, critical minerals, where we're going on AI. They mentioned quantum. There's a lot of areas where the worry really in the West is, are we going to keep our edge? How India plays into keeping the edge vis-a-vis China becomes much more than just a security story.
In terms of collaboration, it looks like imperative, because look, India has been a traditional IT powerhouse, and a lot of global platforms have been powered, and a lot of global CEOs actually are of Indian origin, and at some point in time started in India actually. So collaboration is fine, but as a friend here says that it's going to be more ambition on part of India. Is the West ready? Is the United States ready to accommodate that that ambition in the field of AI and other emerging tech?
Well, what was interesting was at the very end of the Biden term, there was an executive order that came out on high-performance chips and the limiting how many can be sent to India and other countries.
Yes.
I think that should be a goal of the Trump administration, is try to strip that away. Because I think unless India has access to high-performance chips, it limits what India can do. And so, yes, on the private sector side, there's enormous collaboration, but we need to make sure that the barriers are removed.
The barriers are removed, says our friend there, Ingrid. But easier said than done?
No, I again think that there's so much synergy in terms of the eventual objectives here. I mean, we were talking about AI. So there are two use cases, if you will, for AI that I'd like to bring out. I think persistent surveillance is going to be a national security need, not just for US and India, but for all like-minded nations. And persistent surveillance, therefore, you generate petabytes of data that you have to interpret, and AI will be a critical founding block to enable that. The second aspect, and we see that in some of the conflicts around the world, is data resiliency. You need data to be resilient, and you need the threats from adversaries to be conquered, and that again will require AI. So these are just two examples of why both countries will continue to work together and increase strengths in that regard. I do think AI, again, leads to another aspect which was discussed in the first panel, which is we talked about nuclear energy. And I think AI requires a lot of energy. And so where is that going to come from? And so when we look at the energy mix, whether it's nuclear fusion or nuclear fission, both of them, both of those areas, again, require impetus. And I think India and the US can work together on both of them.
And my question to you would be that whenever any new platform or any new technology emerges, there's obviously a fear of technology to begin with. AI is currently probably going through that phase. And both in terms of job losses, both in terms of the upheaval that a new tech can cause, there's a lot of uncertainty in the minds of people, particularly the end users and the people who are going to face the brunt. Do you think that a more collaborative manner of spread, a collaborative process of spread of AI can also address those challenges which are particularly important to vulnerable countries like India?
I think great that you brought this point. I was trying to touch this. A few months back I was in UN, and it's a personal interest because our company focuses on AI and data storage infrastructure. And that brings me to point, this is the first time when internet world came in, European Union was the first to bring the policy to control, to see schooling, to security. Similarly, UN is now focusing on ethical committee on AI and trying to school things how it will be controlled. But last week, Google changed their policy to work on defense weapons and autonomous weapons and AI weapons. And similarly, India, where the security, privacy laws and laws are not that strong, India has to focus developing that. And this is the first time where globally, across whether it is China, whether it is India, whether it is Europe, AI talent is there. This is the first time at the same pace, everybody is trying to build models, everybody is trying to build some platforms, which will become part of the world by 2026, 2027. Gartner has published a report by 2027. World will be using AI in wars, in defense, and other sectors.
Final word to the lady. What do you think, my final question as well, what do you think can be, and which is also quite a mundane question, what do you think can be the big takeaway from this, emerging out of this summit that we are going to see tomorrow? What do you think, is it going to be more cogent in terms of delivered outcome, or will it be a process that we will see being set in motion for the next 4 years?
I think it's going to be a combination. I think we've already seen that both governments are quite forward-leaning in terms of ambition, but there will be areas that are going to require work, trade being one of those. But I think on the defense side, we may see some early opportunities. Certainly, making sure that there's a continuation of some of the programs that exist today, especially the honoring the tech transfer agreements that have been agreed to. But I think it's going to be an exciting 4 years ahead.
And to go back to the point that you made, that executive order during the President Biden's term needs to be rolled back. Do you see any tangible progress being made, delivered out of this summit, or do you think it will again be a little more process driven?
I think it'll be more process driven.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
We can open this up for Q&A, so please direct your questions to any of the panelists, and obviously your name and affiliation, and do speak up for a microphone over there.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Nayan. I'm with Voice of America and also the Wilson Center. I have a couple of questions. One about the Quad. Now, the foreign ministers met a day after the inauguration, and if you look at the joint statement that was issued, it was mostly more focused on security rather than development, which was used to be under the Biden administration, was an equally important pillar of the Quad. Do you think India is ready to have Quad as a more security focused organization, and maybe because the Trump administration, of course, has been very focused on defense and security in their Indo-Pacific and regional security. So do you think India is ready to take up the mantle of being more active in the security space going forward? That's one. Second, in the previous panel, we have been talking about how there are concerns in India that Trump may strike a grand bargain with China. There are concerns in the US as well about recent agreements between India and China. So why do you think that there is a mistrust in this triangle when it comes to China between India and the US? And do you think both sides are not talking to each other or not briefing each other more on their relationship with the Chinese?
This for you guys to answer.
So I'll add to and take it some perspective. I was discussing the other day with top bureaucrat. He was mentioning that, see, US is a mindset where companies, private sector focus on what is the financial gain out of this relationship. And the spend of India is very less than the other countries in defense or any other field. And China is being the more powerful in spending. So there was always a question, this mistrust, okay, I will use India to bargain with China, focus on there, whether it is Pakistan. But now it is more important for US, has a strategic importance to focus on India, not financial gain or economical gain. It's more important for strategic. And that's why India has to be ready for the security, for other Quad process, and US will support that. And that probably by tomorrow's statement or joint statement, it's a process. Maybe in a few months we'll see the trust between both the countries.
On the Quad specifically, I would argue the Quad has always had a security focus in its latest iteration since the last Trump administration when it got upgraded and then further elevated in the Biden administration. But it's been, to put a finer point on your question, is India ready to publicly have it be about security? It's always been, in private, that's always been a part of it. But publicly, it's been about competition and options, alternatives, basically saying the Quad is going to provide ways that you can have, if it's investment credit, if it's infrastructure, that is going to come on favorable terms with respect for your national requirements, with local input, and things that you don't really see with fast, big Chinese infrastructure projects where they bring in a bunch of Chinese workers and they sort of, get the agreement and then run it and that's that. So I think they're going to want to balance both elements. India, of course, is hosting the Quad Summit this year. I fully expect that President Trump will travel to India for that Quad Summit. I think it was a pretty powerful sign that the foreign ministers' inauguration, Quad foreign ministerial, happened right, immediately. I think that showed that the attention is there. And I'm, not surprised that the statement didn't get into much detail because I think that was about as fast as something like that could come together. But I think the security element is there, and it ties to your second question about the mistrust about a deal with China. I don't think anybody's averse to a deal with China if China is behaving in ways that aren't threatening the peace and stability of the Indo-Pacific, right? I mean, I really think we have to remember the reason we're not trying to deter China from thriving and existing. We're trying to deter China from starting a war potentially a world war by overstepping lines in Taiwan or India or the South China Sea or Japan, Philippines, where it has these territorial disputes that it's been so aggressive about. And it's the Chinese assertiveness that has driven countries to say we need to do more to deter China from those actions. And so the concern would come from what's the deal entail and what's the, and so I think the devil would be in the details of any sort of deal. I don't think outside of the press that the U.S. Was too concerned about, the resumption of flights between India and China and the somewhat of a normalization of the relationship. After all, there's still flights between the U.S. and China. They're just at a lot lower level than they were 10 years ago.
The only thing I would add is I think at the government level, there is a higher degree of trust than ever has existed.
Yes.
There is still public mistrust and there is legacy distrust. But by and large, if you think about whether it's India's energy purchases from Russia, that could have been a much bigger deal, and it wasn't. You look at the defense procurements, again, certainly Capitol Hill's not pleased, the administrations aren't pleased, but that's something that this would have derailed the relationship in the past. So I think we're in a much better place, but I think the threat environment is such that if you're talking to military leaders on both sides, they recognize how serious the situation is, and the fact that you now have China and Russia and Korea, from the Trump 1 to Trump 2, the situation is far worse than what it was before. So I don't think that there will be that resolution in the near term.
Go ahead. It's Vishnu from South Asian Herald. How do you think this Trump administration's tariffs of 25% on steel and aluminum are going to impact India?
Where's Mark?
I know. Where's the trade? The last panel was the trade panel. Look, I think I think there's a lot to be seen in what's going to happen on tariffs. There is no doubt when when Donald Trump called India the tariff king, as he did a few years ago, there's a little bit of an admiration in that, right? I mean, he, in a way, he wants the United States to be the tariff king, right? It's not just a critique. It's like, look at how India plays this trading game so tough and favors itself and protects its industry and tries to, make itself number one, and we need to do that too. And I think there, as the earlier panel discussed, I think tariffs are a real issue not just for India but globally. And I just think it's too early to know which tariffs are going to stick, which are negotiating tools, where that leads. The expectation right now from in talking to folks sort of on both sides ahead of this visit is we likely will be kicking off trade talks, as Mark Linscott spoke about on the prior panel. Maybe that forestalls tariffs, maybe it doesn't. Anything that's global, of course, applies to India too. But it's this is a period of high adventure when it comes to global trade.
I think we'll have to close, but we have one last question from Anthony, and
there's one there and there's one back there.
Okay, this Anthony, right?
Yes, Anthony, yeah.
There's only Anthony.
Sometimes there's one. Thanks very much, guys. Wanted to ask about the outlook for reform in the United States that could accelerate defense cooperation between the U.S. and India. I think Vikram, you just wrote something with Samir, you touched on this in a recent piece. Of course, Indian defense procurement is a challenge. We know that there have been challenges on the U.S. side. Some of those have been steadily addressed. Ingrid mentioned Strategic Trade Authorization Tier 1, which happened amid tariff pressures and imposition of steel and aluminum tariffs in the first Trump administration. So you can compartmentalize trade and strategic trade, I guess you could say, to an extent. But when you really look out at it, as somebody who's worked on trying to find where those points of friction are, the last Biden administration touched a couple, the outgoing Biden administration touched a couple of things toward the end on civil space launch, for example, touched on some nuclear issues on the entity lists, for example. But there's not a lot of structural problems. Some of those problems are more sentimental, hesitations around dual use, for example. And then, of course, the ITAR broadly. So now you have a situation where it looks like our bureaucracy, the U.S. bureaucracy, is likely to fall into line with obstruction If you have a strong presidential direction, that would seem to be the case. Yet you also see a potential weakening of that same bureaucracy that you need to carry forward hard things. So if you were looking out at it as a panel that has experience with this in many different ways, what do you think the outlook is for global reform to the processes around defense sales, which are not specific to India, but will clearly benefit India as the world's largest arms importer?
I don't know if Vivek wants to take that first. Having been the beneficiary and victim of U.S.
No, I do. I mean, I think you're probably the best position to answer that question that you asked. But I do feel that, you know, whether it's an FMS process or DCS process, I've observed the relationship over the last 20 years. And there has been a sea change and a whole lot of progress over the years from some of the first sales that happened to where we are now. And that's largely due to an understanding and education between both the bureaucratic systems, where you have a DPP or a DAP in India, and you have a selling process here, that they've started to understand each other better. They've started to understand FMS, DCS, hybrid sales better. And so I think that structurally, I think both bureaucracies, as you rightly said, have to be able to function a lot more smoother, even with the top-down political direction. And I think that is happening. I think both governments are cognizant of the fact that some of these things have to be accelerated because timelines and, quite frankly, technology is progressing at a much faster pace. So as soon as, let us say, India has solidified their qualitative requirements for procuring a type of platform, and if the timelines to actually procure the platform is so large, you already have other products that are in the market that will start to compete with this longish process. So, but I think a lot of progress has been made.
I mean, look, the fact is, the big deals that we've seen, including, we haven't even talked about General Atomics' big sale in progress of the MQ-9 drones, but then these creative deals, Javelin, and let's co-produce those things, or those they're still ideas, or the ones that seem like they're moving forward, like the GE jet engines. Those took, as you know, top-level political pressure on the system to force them forward. I don't have a way to know this will happen, but I suspect this administration will try to make it more standardized, speedy response. And that could be on everything from how quickly things get processed when there's a request for information that now, a lot of times these things take 6 months. I'm talking to a company right now that's wondering why they haven't had a response from the Navy in 6 months to a request from the Indians. And I think this administration is likely to identify those kinds of really sclerotic and unacceptably slow, processes, and probably try to hammer on them, not just with the White House calling and saying you have to do this, being the only tool. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some reforms. I wouldn't be surprised to see more empowered folks put in the state, in the political military bureau, maybe at DITSA, the Defense Technology Security Agency, maybe the Defense Security Cooperation Agency, sort of say, like, how do we help America sell to the world? Because there's a real desire to get American industry moving. And if you look at reindustrialization or boosting the defense industrial base in the United States, a big part of that has got to be competing on the global stage effectively. And if our friends or adversaries, the Chinese and the Russians or the French and the Israelis, are outperforming, I think that's likely to get attention. But watch this space.
Just to add on, I think the acceleration will happen because it's good or bad. US has realized India is a great partner to decrease the influence of Chinese defense across, which is country coming near towards US. If you see whether it is South America, whether it is other regions where Chinese influence is coming much largely, selling a lot of defense things, US has realized India is the next big thing to partner with to decrease this influence. It will accelerate as everybody is part of.
And my final thing would just be like, why shouldn't the United States be helping India with its undersea programs, or with its strategic capabilities, or with its aircraft carriers? And I think those questions will, I mean, they get asked every now and then, and mostly are put in the too hard bucket, but maybe those are areas that are going to be open for discussion.
And and it's not just the U.S. giving to India. I mean, I actually think whether it's shipbuilding or we've got sub-zero outside, but India has experience in certain environments that we don't. And so what can India bring to the table too that would be beneficial to the U.S. side? I think that's probably been missing in all of this as well.
Yeah.
I think Jay, a final question, and then we can bring the panel to a close.
Okay. Talk towards that.
How does Iran factor into the talks today, or tomorrow, between the President and Prime Minister? Will India's relationship with Iran be used as a potential mediating tool to resolve the conflict in the Middle East?
Well, I mean, now you're out of the realm of any of our really knowing what we're talking about. But this is what I would say. The president, his most recent comments on Iran were essentially like, I would love Iran to do well, and we would love them to be prosperous, but they can't get a nuclear weapon, and if they go the wrong way, all hell will break loose. Right? It was one of those all hell break looses. I'm paraphrasing. It's not a quote. I think that actually though sums up where he'd want to be. And I think Iran is in a profoundly different position than it was. This I can speak to a little bit, from a military security standpoint. Iran is in a very different position than it was last time around. And last time around, maximum pressure was the approach of the Trump administration. They would argue it was more effective than the alternative. This time, Iran has very little room for maneuver. And it is, as a consequence of Iran choosing to launch hundreds and hundreds of ballistic missiles at Israel, it, not once but then twice, it invited the destruction of its air defenses and exposed itself as extremely vulnerable, and it lost all of its proxies in the region. So I think Iran's at an interesting weak point. I would actually hope that good offices from other powers that could encourage the Iranians to think differently would be used, and that could include India.
All right, with that, please join me one more time in a round of applause. Bikram, Dr. For our panels of those, we do have reception over there, hors d'oeuvres and drinks, and of course, still coffee and refreshments. So thank you all once again.
You did well. Sure. I'm around tomorrow, but I have to tomorrow morning or something. Go to sleep early. Where are you staying? Let's say. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Not the rich guy. Thank you for having me. Sure. Yeah, don't do it. Then we'll reward you. Yeah. The thing is, I was an EOA reporter. Just came in from there. Well, I don't know if it came from USG, but chat,